Good afternoon. Welcome to Inside the IDB or Dentro del BID. For those of you who are connected before, we had a few technical difficulties, but don't worry, you haven't missed anything. We are going to be starting again. So as you know, Inside the IDB or Dentro del BID is a space where we open our doors to you and share a little about how life is in our organization. My name is Ria Jordan. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisor in the IDB Group. And I'm excited to be here this afternoon, sharing the stage with Carolina Ceja, our General Manager of the Human Resources Department, Stephanie Oeda, the Gender Diversity Inclusion Lead of IDB Invest, and our special guest this afternoon from EDGE, Magali Saul, who is the Lead Client Advisor in EDGE Strategy. As an organization, we take pride in the fact that we have recertified in EDGE for the third time. This time, making the IDB Group the first development bank in the Americas and the second worldwide to achieve the second level of this prestigious award. This afternoon, I would also like to highlight that as of this date, the IDB Group is the only multilateral development bank in the world with an EDGE Move certification. To move into the main part of our event today, we'll be discussing the importance of fostering inclusivity and equity in the workplace and share about the journey that we have embarked upon for a while now and continue building our way forward to achieve gender equity. We wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the experience we went through for this recertification and to share with you more in detail about our experience through the certification process and why this recognition is very important to us. Before we start, I want to encourage our audience to send in your questions. We will be responding to a few of them at the end of this broadcast. To kick it off, I want to ask EDGE Strategy to give the audience some context. Magali, thank you for joining us today. Could you please explain what the EDGE Move certification entails and what initiatives from the IDB Group stood out in this process?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here today. Allow me, first of all, to really congratulate both organizations, so IDB and IDB Invest, for having reached the second level of certification, an award that few organizations around the world have. Let me tell you a little bit about what EDGE is. So EDGE is the leading assessment methodology for workplace gender equality. We work with around 250 organizations around the world. And of course, that includes a number of IFIs and BFIs. In terms of the methodology and what do we take into consideration, there are basically four key pillars, four key areas that define success when it comes to workplace gender equality. The first one is, of course, the representation. So this is looking at the share of men and women at different levels, in different functions, and looking at the different flows across the organization. The second one is the pillar of the pay equity, when we're going to be looking at the unexplained gender pay gap specifically. The third one is the effectiveness of policies and practices. And then the fourth one is the inclusiveness of the culture, right? So as you probably understood, it's quite a holistic process. First two pillars, very quantitative based on results, whereas the two following ones are more qualitative and focusing on the underlying processes that an organization has. So that being said, with a background around EDGE, let me tell you a little bit about what allowed both organizations to reach the second level of certification. And I would say that there are three points that are common to both organizations that allow them to reach the second level of certification. The first one is the representation. So the analysis did reveal a consistent share of men and women across levels of responsibility. We had a share of men and women above or just at the threshold for substantive representation at each management level, which is, of course, very important. We then had the analysis and the audit process, because it's very important that this process is independently audited by a third party. So the analysis and the audit revealed that there was no high-level risk associated with an unexplained gender pay gap in both institutions. And then finally, the third point is that the analysis revealed an intentional and very specific and consistent process to structure these efforts around gender equity, as we saw that the effectiveness of policies and practices for both organizations improved across a number of areas.
Thank you so much, Magali, for sharing this information. You know, at the IDB Group, we are taking visible steps to close gender gaps and to continue to give our employees a voice to recognize inequities. As we mentioned previously, there is still work to be done, of course, and we take pride in the progress we've made so far. Carolina, I want to turn now to you. So how does our progress so far in terms of being an equitable workplace reflect who we want to be as employers? What are we doing to strengthen our efforts to provide equal opportunities for all, regardless of how our employees identify?
Good. So thank you, Ria. Thank you for our question. So first of all, I would like to start by saying that we are very, very proud of this achievement. This reflects all the effort that we have been made in the past years towards being an equitable workplace. And as Magali shared with us, these remarkable results recognize some actions to make sure our employees feel valued for who they are. So adding to Magali's insights, I will complement with some examples of what we are doing so far. So first and foremost, we continue to have equal pay for equal work. What does it mean? It means that both men and women with similar roles and responsibilities, they earn the same at our organization. Within our inclusive policies, I'm proud that we offer options and benefits for our staffs regardless of the gender. And one example that we are very proud of is our parental leave policy, that is very substantial and gender neutral. And last but not least, from the EDGE survey, our employees agree that our organization provides them with the necessary training to improve their skills. And majority of them, they say that they would recommend the IDB and IDB Invest to a female or male colleague to work here. So this really reflects some of the efforts that we're doing, and there are a lot more that we keep improving and making sure we implement to provide this environment. And all these insights are very critical for our efforts and aligned with our vision 2025, where gender and diversity are cross-cutting themes. And we already been taking these steps to make sure equity is the center of our operational and talent management efforts. So one effort we did this year is that we moved from diversity and inclusion to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in this framework, we have a couple of actions that are priority for us. So the first one is to expand the leadership accountability by guiding the supervisors, the managers, the leads, and teams into a deeper sense of community and understanding what is a diverse and equitable and an inclusive environment. We keep supporting this diverse workforce, not only with focus on gender, but focus on other groups. And we do everything to mitigate risks and barriers to an inclusive and equitable environment, identifying those strategies and being proactive with the initiatives, because we want to make sure we are as diverse as the region we serve. As employers, we want to be a workplace that champions our employees' background, experiences, and that recognize that our employees, they have specific needs, and we acknowledge this accordingly. Now, Ria, I'm curious to ask you, as the diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor, how do you think that gender equity and performance are linked in our workplace?
Thanks for the question, Carolina. And there are three main points which I will raise. First, the impact that gender diversity has on institutional performance. The IDB finances its operations by issuing bonds in international capital markets, and the financial rating agencies are the ones which assign us our credit ratings, which have been AAA since 1962. Increasingly, these rating agencies are looking at social elements such as diversity as a component for our scores. Positive scores and the social elements correlate with a lower cost of capital, which could translate into stronger investor interest for IDB bonds, which may in turn contribute to lower borrowing costs for our clients. The second point is how our gender diversity signals an attractive work environment for talent. We know that top female candidates in particular care about gender diverse work environments. If the most talented individuals go to places that do better with these kinds of targets, then we're better positioned to help our client to solve the most pressing development challenges in the region. And because we support gender diversity, we are better able to capture the recurrent or the integrated benefits earlier, leading us to present ourselves as a better option in a competitive market. Finally, I will add the importance of having both men and women in a conversation. A study by Credit Suisse shows a correlation between a work environment where gender equality is present and better performance, individually and collectively. In fact, we know here in the IDB group through our work in operations, projects, technical support initiatives, and corporate endeavors that more efficient and effective solutions are found when men and women work together, bringing their unique strengths and ideas to the table. But on that point, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the whole conversation about gender equity, because it's important to highlight that gender equity is usually restrained to discussions about women. And that's the beauty of EDGE certification. It's not just about women, but it's about finding that balance. And therefore, I want to turn to Stephanie. Stephanie, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. So please share your insights into the difference between gender equity and gender equality.
Hello, everyone. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Encantada de estar con ustedes. Thank you so much for the question, Ria. And indeed, you mentioned very important points. Equity and equality are not the same. When we are talking about gender equity, it really means recognizing what are the specific differences that each one of us needs in order to get to the same level. Equality is actually, once that you have this equity, putting everybody, digamos, at the same line so they can progress. So as you can see, both are very linked, but are not the same. So for us, it's really about aiming at gender equity. And Carolina mentioned that we're now talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a big, big effort on our side. And hopefully we're gonna get there even more. You mentioned another very important topic, and it's the role of men. The role of women in the workplace will not change if the role of men at home stays the same. And that's where we also talk about equity. We need to be sure that both sex and gender are actually having the same responsibilities and opportunities to access. So we will never really achieve equality if we're not getting to equity. And that's why something very important that both of you have mentioned and Magali mentioned at the beginning, EDGE looks at what is not only the numbers, but the perceptions. And we really need to continue on that element, because you can have wonderful policies, but if the employees, men or women, cannot take advantage of them, we're not going to achieve that. So if I leave the audience with something important is, remember, equity will be really understanding what each one of us needs, taking into account our circumstances. What I may need may not be the same thing that Magali needs, recognizing the difference of situations. And equality is just giving everybody the same without taking into account that we might all need something a little bit different to be able to achieve the greatest. Over to you, Ria.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that insight. And you raised some very important points, because we now know that each employee, the way they show up in the workplace is very different, and the needs of each employee is different. Each employee is complex, embodying not just one, but several identities, as you mentioned, Stephanie, and we need to be able to meet employees where they are. We've seen this played out in the changes in the workforce over the past few years, and especially about the new perspectives on the future of work and especially what that looks like after this pandemic. So turning again to you, Magali, could you describe the importance of considering other intersectional issues in our action planning? Have you noticed any relevant trends on how companies are addressing gender equity with this intersectional lens?
Absolutely, that's a really, really good question, Ria. Thank you for that. I mean, indeed, we are seeing more and more organizations look at gender, take an intersectional lens of gender equity by looking at the intersectionality between gender and other dimensions of our identities, such as sexual orientation or ethnic background, nationality, age, working with a disability, etc. Right? So this is something that we are seeing across the world. At the same time, it's also something that the approach depends a lot from one market to another, from a country to another, to an organization to another. But definitely it is something that is taking place around the world. And even though the level of maturity around the data collection, right? There are some markets where the data is readily available and others where that's not the case. We are seeing more and more organizations take the first step with what Stephanie was mentioning before, right? With the employee survey. So really capturing, starting, including in the engagement survey, including in the diversity and inclusion survey, additional dimensions of diversity on top of the gender allows organizations to understand whether there are any differences in the experiences and perceptions of employees across these different groups. So without a doubt, this is something that we are seeing more and more. And of course, we do not see that slowing down in the near future.
Thanks a lot, Magali, and thank you all to all the panelists again. And this has been a really rich conversation, and I'm happy that we've had the opportunity to have it. I want to make sure we cover some questions from the audience, and I do have some. The first one I'm going to throw out to you, Magali, and it's from Alejandra Mogollon. I'm going to ask it first to you, Magali, but also ask maybe Stephanie and Carolina to complement. What really are the advantages of getting to that second level of certification, the Edge Move certification?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, the EDGE certification really recognizes performance, right, when it comes to achieving gender equity. So there are 3 levels of certification that an organization can receive. The first one is the EDGE Assess, which recognizes the commitment of organizations. It's the level at which the majority of organizations that we work with are at and start at. Then we have the EDGE Move that recognizes progress. There are still some opportunities to improve, but recognizes a lot of progress. This is a much smaller sample size of organizations. And then, of course, the EDGE Lead, which celebrates success. So these are organizations that meet every single one of the standards across the 4 pillars that I was mentioning at the beginning of our conversation. So EDGE Move clearly is and again, going back to what I was mentioning before, this is a process that has been independently audited, looking at not only at statistical data, verifying policies and practices, and also taking a look at employees' perceptions and experiences. So this is a very clear sign that the organization has made progress when it comes to these topics since the previous assessment, as we were discussing at the beginning. And at the same time, we cannot also undermine, as Ria was pointing out before, this is also a very important attraction tool, right? It's a strong message, not only to current employees, to potential future employees, to the countries in which that you serve, that this is something that you are fully committed to, and of course, that you hope to continue to improve on.
Okay, thank you so much. We seem to be having a lot of questions. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to throw it out to Carolina and ask Stephanie to complement. So the question is, how can the IDB encourage through its business interactions with clients to also pursue a diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda and strategy? Carolina?
So I would say I would leave more for the interactions with clients with Stephanie, since it's her specialty. But I would emphasize what Magali just said in terms of recruitment, in terms of attraction, in terms of retention of our employees. I think having this certification really shows our commitment with the topic And from an external party auditing and going through this very rigorous process. So it's not just us internally saying what we do, but it's really a recognition that we are going to the right direction. And I will pass this to Stephanie to explain more about the relationship with the clients.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carolina. Well, a couple of points. As Magali said, Edge Move is the second level, right? For us, it's very important first because as Ria explained at the beginning, we work with clients in the region. So how could we go to clients and share with them some strategies, what they could do, how that is good for their business if we are not doing it, right? So we're walking the touch and preaching what we are and doing what we're preaching. So that is very important. All of the elements of having Edge Move are really good for us as an institution. When we have diverse leadership, we take better business decisions. When we have diverse teams, we can be more understanding on what region needs, what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, and therefore be more closer to our clients. Now, how does this help us with our client? And how, the question was, are we pushing the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda? Latin America and the Caribbean has changed. Over the past year and a half, the conversation changed tremendously. Now, there is no company that can talk about these topics without actually addressing that our region is extremely diverse. 1/4 of the population is Afro-descendant, almost 32 million indigenous and traditional people, 70 million are living with a disability, and of course, we have roughly 5 to 7% of individuals from the LGBTQ plus community. There is no way that we're going to achieve a fully inclusive and productive Latin America and the Caribbean if we do not have all of these talents working across sector and across the economy. So that for us is very important. And we work with each one of our clients to help them not only how to attract, retain, and develop all of this talent, but also working a lot with financial institutions in accelerating the access to financing for all of the entrepreneurs. In Brazil, we're focusing on Afro-Brazilian entrepreneurs, across the region, increasing the numbers for women entrepreneurs. And of course, not only about having access to the finance, but also the access to the market. So we work strongly with our companies so that the value chains are open for women-led, minority-owned companies. And that's how you create a holistic cycle, the talent, the access to finance, and the market. And that's what we do working with our clients, pushing the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That was a really great answer, Stephanie, and it's really indicative of how we show up for our clients in the region and how we project ourselves and what is our value proposition. I have one last question, and it's actually for me. Hernan is asking, how will Edge Move help the IDB to gain new business? And I will sort of go back to what I was saying before about our rating agencies and how we are rated and how we show up in the market, especially the bonds market, because more and more the organizations are looking and rating us according to our certifications and diversity and our plans to build a more diverse and equitable workforce, right? And so when we are able to score high on those sections of the rating agencies' questionnaires, then we are able to maintain our triple A rating. And when clients in the region are looking to see where they can get financing from for their most pressing development challenges, they're looking to see the cost of borrowing, right? As any individual would. You want to see how much it's going to cost, you know, for you to borrow money. And if we are able to have lower cost of borrowings, then that is an attractive proposition for our clients, right? Moving right along, I have another question for Magali, and the question is, what is the process to begin the certification? If you had to say, what is the first step that an organization can take to begin a certification with Edge, what would you say that is?
Absolutely. I mean, the certification is, of course, not the objective in and of itself, right? It's a recognition, it's the cherry on top. But more than anything, the EDGE certification process allows organizations to understand where they stand in terms of the journey around gender equity and more broadly diversity and inclusion. So this is why the first step would be to undertake this assessment, right? So to contact us and to start the process with us, looking at, so first the policies and practices, looking at the statistical data, and then launching this employee survey to look at, so going back to what Stephanie was mentioning, this is one of the key aspects of the EDGE certification process, is what we call this triangulation of the three sources of information, where we not only look at just the outcomes, but more about, okay, whether the intention of the organization in terms of the policies and practices is actually reflected in the statistical data, in the results, and then of course, whether employees are aware of it, do they use it, do they not use it, and why, etc. So without a doubt, the first step is to understand where you stand through these rigorous assessments. And then of course, organizations choose to undergo the second step, which would be this independent verification done by a third party that then leads to the EDGE certification, depending, of course, on which level of certification an organization can receive.
Thank you, Magali. And unfortunately, we are out of time. But before we close, I want to highlight that our institutional and individual commitment goes beyond this achievement. It's, as Magali was saying, a nice cherry on top, but we have work to do. And as we have seen and heard today, gender equity is a critical component, not just for our journey internally in building an equitable workplace, but also how we show up in the market, how we show up for our clients, and how we show up generally worldwide. We've talked about how proud we are of the work we are doing and how proud we are. We can see our employees being able to raise their voices and take action towards the organization's priorities. And we want to highlight that each of us has an individual responsibility to continue moving the needle. Individually, if we contribute, collectively, we'll get there. So I want to close this Dentro del BID by thanking all our speakers, Carolina, Stephanie, Magali, and of course, all the team behind this initiative, because we could not have done this alone. To all of you watching, stay tuned for all the events we'll be having this month and in the months to come. And in closing, I also want to remind you that there are many opportunities to work with us. If you like what you've seen and you want to make a difference in the region, visit our careers site at www.jobs.iadb.org. Thank you and stay tuned for our next Inside the IDB, Dentro del BID. Thank you. Bye.